People reveal themselves not in what they do, but in what they think you'll never notice. I didn't realize my marriage had ended until I found something small enough to fit on a collar. A stain, the wrong shade, on a blouse she wore to a work trip. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, tell me something. Where are you watching from? I read the comments, and it still amazes me how far these stories travel. Now, I still remember the exact moment I fell in love with Sarah. It was a Tuesday night 11 years ago, in a Thai restaurant in downtown Portland neither of us had chosen on purpose. A mutual friend canceled last minute, leaving two strangers across from each other with a reservation and nothing in common, or so we thought. She ordered the spiciest thing on the menu without checking the heat level, laughed when it made her eyes water, refused to admit it was too hot. She just kept eating, eyes streaming, laughing at herself. I remember thinking, I want to know this woman for the rest of my life. And for 9 of the 11 years that followed, I did. If you're someone who stays for the full story, the quiet ones that unravel slowly, subscribe. I tell them the way they actually happen. We built something real. A house in a neighborhood we both loved. A dog named Cleo who slept at the foot of our bed. Sunday morning coffee on the back porch, even in the rain. We weren't perfect. We argued about money, about her long hours, about the way I sometimes went quiet when I should have talked. But we were honest. At least, I thought we were. That's the thing about trust. It doesn't announce when it stops being true. It just quietly becomes the foundation of your life. Until one Thursday evening, it isn't. Sarah had been in Chicago for 5 days. A regional leadership conference, she'd explained, the kind her company sent senior managers to once or twice a year. She'd gone to one the previous spring without incident. I had no reason to think this one was different, but something was different the moment she walked through the door. It was subtle, the kind of thing you couldn't photograph or point to or describe to someone without sounding paranoid. It was in the way she moved. A certain ease in her shoulders, like someone returning from vacation rather than a week of conference sessions and client dinners. There was a brightness in her eyes that I hadn't seen in months, maybe longer. She hugged me quickly, too quickly. The kind of hug you give someone you're glad to see, but not someone you've missed. She kissed me on the cheek after 5 days, and said she was exhausted and disappeared upstairs to unpack. I stood in the hallway for a moment after she left. Cleo looked up at me. Even the dog seemed uncertain. I told myself I was imagining things. I went to the kitchen and started dinner. But you know how certain sounds stay with you even after the music stops. Something was echoing in that hug, in that smile, in the way she hadn't quite looked at me. We had dinner together that night. She talked about the conference, keynote speakers, panel discussions, a rooftop cocktail event on the second evening. Her descriptions were detailed enough to seem real but strangely flat, like she was reading from a schedule rather than recounting an experience. When I asked who she'd sat with at dinner, she said, "Oh, various people," and changed the subject. I let it go. Later, I lay awake beside her listening to her breathe. She fell asleep within minutes. I stared at the ceiling for 2 hours, trying to locate the feeling in my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't even suspicion, exactly. It was the specific sadness of recognizing that the person next to you has become, in some way you can't yet name, a stranger. The next morning, life resumed its ordinary shape. Sarah left for work early. I worked from home, answered emails, took a call, made a sandwich. Cleo napped on the couch. By evening, I had almost convinced myself that the unease from the night before was nothing. Just the strange recalibration of two people returning to the same orbit after time apart. Then I started the laundry. Her suitcase was still half unpacked on the bedroom floor. She'd been too tired to finish the night before. I sorted through it while she showered downstairs. Work trousers, a cardigan, some folded pajamas. And then, near the bottom, folded loosely and tucked against the lining, a cream-colored silk blouse. The one she'd bought specifically for the trip. "Conference clothes," she'd called it when she packed, holding it up to show me. $65 from a boutique downtown. She'd been pleased with it. I almost folded it without looking. Almost. I held it up to shake out the wrinkles and stopped. There was a mark along the collar. A faint smear, the color of dusty rose, the unmistakable trace of lipstick. Not pressed on, but smudged, the way it transfers when two faces are very close. The kind of thing most people wouldn't notice in the chaos of unpacking. But I noticed, because I know how Sarah treats her clothes, and I know her lipstick. She is the woman who carries stain remover in her handbag, who takes silk to the dry cleaner the same day she wears it, who once called me from a restaurant parking lot because she'd gotten salad dressing on her sleeve and needed me to look up whether it was safe to dab with club soda. This blouse had been rinsed, quickly, carelessly, in a bathroom sink somewhere, rubbed at until the mark faded but didn't fully disappear. And here was the thing that turned my stomach completely. The color was wrong. It wasn't Sarah's shade. Sarah wears the same deep burgundy lipstick she has worn for years. This smear was soft pink, almost nude. Not hers. Someone else had been close enough to leave a mark on my wife's collar, and my wife had tried to wash it away before coming home. I don't know how long I stood there holding it under the bedroom lamp. Long enough for the shower to stop. Long enough for my hands to start shaking. Long enough to know, with a certainty that sat in my stomach like cold stone, that something had happened in Chicago. When Sarah came upstairs, towel wrapped around her hair, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. The blouse was folded in my lap. "Laundry," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Almost done." She looked at the blouse for half a second, just half a second, and then looked away and began applying lotion to her arms. Her movements were perfectly casual. Her face gave nothing. But that half second was everything. I put the blouse in a bag, alone, apart from the rest of the laundry. I set it on the shelf in my closet where I keep things I haven't dealt with yet. Then I went downstairs, finished dinner, and sat across from my wife of 9 years and listened to her tell me about a podcast she'd started on the flight home. She seemed comfortable, easy, unburdened. That was the moment I understood I wasn't dealing with someone who had made a terrible mistake and couldn't live with the guilt. I was dealing with someone who had decided she could live with it just fine. Over the next 48 hours, things I had explained away for months began rearranging themselves into a different picture. The late-night work calls she took in the garage, door pulled shut. The phone that always lay face down on the table. The Tuesday evenings when she stayed late for a client call, but came home smelling like she'd freshened up somewhere between the office and our driveway. The way she had seemed almost relieved when she'd canceled our anniversary dinner in September. Not guilty, not apologetic, relieved. I had explained every single one of these things away, because explaining them away was easier than the alternative. I wasn't ready to live in the alternative yet, but by Monday morning I was. While Sarah was at brunch with her sister, I drove across town to a private cosmetic analysis lab. The kind used by insurance companies and private investigators to identify product formulas, match shades, and confirm whether something found on a garment belongs to the person who owns it. I'd found them online in one of those sleepless nights that followed, the kind where you start searching for things you're not entirely sure you want to find. I felt ridiculous walking through the door, 41 years old, holding a sealed bag with my wife's blouse in it, asking a stranger to tell me whose lipstick was on my wife's collar. The technician was matter-of-fact about the whole thing. She took the bag, took a separate swab sample of Sarah's own lipstick that I'd brought for comparison, and told me results would take 4 to 5 business days. I drove home and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. 4 to 5 business days of making dinner and kissing her goodnight and lying next to her in the dark, not knowing if anything was real. Here is what no one tells you about suspicion. It is exhausting in a way that grief is not. Grief has direction. You know what you've lost. You move through it, around it, eventually past it. But suspicion has no shape. It lives in every ordinary moment, in the way she laughs at something on her phone, in the pause before she answers a question, in the perfectly timed, "I love you" at the end of a phone call she's already walking away from. You can't grieve something you haven't confirmed. So instead you just watch. And the watching hollows you out. Have you ever sat across from someone you love, someone whose coffee order you know by heart, whose laugh sounds different on the phone than in person, and felt like you were watching a performance? That is what those 5 days were. I was the audience and the only one who knew it. Sarah was extraordinary during those 5 days. Patient, warm, present in a way she hadn't been in months. She made Saturday breakfast from scratch, eggs, toast, sliced fruit arranged on the plate the way she does when she's trying. She suggested we take Cleo to the park. She held my hand while we walked. I held hers back and felt nothing except the specific loneliness of pretending. At night, I couldn't sleep. I'd wait until I was certain she was under, then ease out of bed and sit at the kitchen table in the dark. I started writing things down, not to document them, just to organize my own mind. A timeline, events, the moments I'd dismissed. When I spread them out in front of me as a list rather than isolated incidents, the pattern was so clear I felt almost stupid for not seeing it sooner. There had been a name. She'd mentioned it once in passing 3 or 4 months ago over dinner. A regional manager from the company's West Coast office. Danielle. She'd said the name the way you say the name of someone you've decided is boring, dismissively, quickly, like you want the subject to close. "She's harmless," she'd said, which I now understood was something people say about someone they very much want you to stop thinking about. I had stopped thinking about her, but sitting at that kitchen table in the dark, I let myself think about her now. I pulled up what little I actually knew. I'd seen Danielle once, briefly, at a company event 2 years earlier, tall, dark hair cut short, the kind of easy confidence that fills a room without demanding attention, the kind of woman who always seems to know exactly where to stand so the light catches her well. I remembered thinking she seemed interesting. I remembered Sarah steering me toward the drinks table before I had the chance to find out. I had thought nothing of it at the time. I thought about it now. I kept returning to that word. Harmless, the specific word you choose when you need someone to look away. I had looked away. For months, I had been an extraordinarily cooperative audience. By day 3, I wasn't eating properly. I'd sit at the dinner table and move food around the plate, and Sarah would ask if I was okay, and I'd say I was tired, just tired, long week. She accepted this. She didn't push. That, too, told me something. On day 4, I called a divorce attorney. Not to make an appointment, just to have a name, a number, something concrete to hold. The woman who answered was businesslike and kind and said they could see me whenever I was ready. I thanked her and put the number in a folder in my desk drawer and went back to the living room where Sarah was watching television, feet tucked under her, Cleo asleep across her lap. She looked peaceful. She looked like my wife. I sat down beside her. She leaned against my shoulder. I let her. I keep thinking about that moment. How easy it would have been to simply decide not to know, to let the lab results go uncollected, to file the whole thing under things I chose not to find out. Some people do that. I understand it now, in a way I never did before. The call came on a Friday. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, engine running, a list on my phone of things we needed for the week. Olive oil, coffee, the brand of crackers she liked. My phone rang, the lab. The technician's voice was calm and professional. She told me the lipstick residue on the collar did not match the sample I had provided. Different formula entirely. Different brand. And the shade, the soft, dusty pink I had noticed on the blouse, was confirmed to be a completely separate product. Not Sarah's, not even close. She asked if I had any questions. I said no. I thanked her. I ended the call. Then I sat in that parking lot for a very long time. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I had expected to cry or to feel something dramatic, the movie version of a woman receiving devastating news. What I actually felt was quieter and more terrible than that. It was the feeling of a long-running argument finally ending. Not resolution, just cessation. I'd known. Of course I had known. And now there was nothing left to hope was wrong. I bought the groceries. All of them, including the crackers. I drove home. I made dinner. And when Sarah said, "I love you" over pasta that evening, I looked her in the eye and said it back. Because I had already decided that the time for honesty would come, but I would choose when. I have never considered myself a strategic person. I'm an architect. I design structures that have to hold weight. That's the job. But in my personal life, I've always been more instinct than plan. I say what I think. I trust what I'm given. I don't game things out 3 moves ahead. But the week after the lab results, I became someone I didn't entirely recognize. I became very calm, very quiet, very methodical. People who have been betrayed deeply will understand this. There is a phase that comes after the grief, before the anger, where your mind goes ice cold and precise, where every emotion gets set aside and something older, more animal, takes the controls. I was in that phase for 2 weeks, and I used it well. Sarah's phone backed up automatically to the household cloud account, something we'd set up years ago after she lost a phone in a parking garage. She'd never changed it. I accessed the backup the night of the lab call, while she slept 4 feet away from me. What I found was not the story of one bad decision in Chicago. It was the story of 7 months. There were messages with Danielle going back to the previous March. Friendly at first, then warmer, then intimate in a way that left no room for doubt. Danielle's messages were confident and unhurried, the writing of someone who was very used to being wanted and entirely unbothered by it. There were hotel reservations in 3 different cities, paid from a credit card I had never seen on any of our statements. There were rideshare receipts to addresses that weren't her office and weren't any friend's home I recognized. There were photos, not explicit, but telling. The way 2 people stand when they are not just colleagues. The way they look at a camera when they believe no one who matters will ever see it. Danielle was laughing in most of them. Open, easy, completely at home. 7 months. While I was trusting her. While I was taking Cleo for evening walks and fixing the leak under the kitchen sink and picking up her dry cleaning and cooking dinner and believing, genuinely believing, that we were going through a rough patch together. We weren't going through anything together. She was living a completely separate life and I was the furniture. I want to pause here and tell you something. I have been asked since whether I felt angry in that moment. The honest answer is, not yet. What I felt was a kind of profound revision. Like finding out a book you loved was actually a different story than you'd been reading. Every good memory I had was now being quietly recaptioned. I printed everything. Not in a rage, methodically, over 2 evenings, while she watched television downstairs. The messages, the receipts, the reservation confirmations. I organized them chronologically in a folder. I wrote a timeline on a clean sheet of paper and cross-referenced it with the months she'd come home distracted, or short with me, or briefly, inexplicably guilty in a way I'd assumed was work stress. Every one of those moments now had a different explanation. There was one evening during those 2 weeks where I sat in my car outside our house for 20 minutes before going inside. The folder was on the passenger seat. The porch light was on. Through the front window I could see the faint glow of the television, Sarah inside, warm, ordinary, completely unaware. I just sat there, not ready to go in and pretend, not ready to end it either, just suspended somewhere between 2 versions of my life, unable to move in either direction. I pressed my hand flat on the folder and let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to lose, not just the marriage, but the version of myself who had trusted it completely. The woman who had believed, without question, that she was loved the way she loved. I sat there until the feeling passed. Then I walked inside, kissed her on the cheek, and asked what she wanted for dinner. because I still had work to do. I met with the attorney on a Wednesday afternoon. Her name was Miriam Chen, mid-50s, silver-haired, with the kind of directness that felt like a kindness rather than a coldness. I set the folder on her desk and she read through it slowly, turning pages without expression. When she finished, she squared the papers, set them down, and looked at me. "This is thorough," she said. "I had time to be thorough," I said. She almost smiled. "In terms of the proceedings, you're protected. Completely. She entered this with significant marital assets under her control, but given the duration and the evidence of concealment, you have a very strong position." I asked her what strong position meant in practical terms. She told me. I left that office feeling something I hadn't expected. Not power, exactly. Not satisfaction. Just the solid ground of knowing exactly where I stood. For 7 months I had been standing on something hollow. Now I finally knew what was under my feet. That evening I came home to Sarah making stir-fry, Cleo circling her ankles, music playing from the kitchen speaker. She looked up when I walked in, smiled, asked how my day was. "Good," I said. "Really good, actually." I set the table. I opened a bottle of wine. I made her laugh twice over dinner. I was the easiest, most relaxed version of myself I'd been in months. She had no idea that the storm had already formed. She just couldn't see it yet. If this story is hitting different, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now the next 3 weeks, and I want to be careful about how I describe them. I've told this story to a few people since, and the reaction I sometimes get is that what I did was cruel, that I was playing a long game to maximize her humiliation, that I was extracting some kind of revenge disguised as patience. I understand why it reads that way, but that's not what was happening inside me. What was happening was simpler and sadder than that. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to blow up the house, to have the conversation, to say the words out loud and watch our life collapse in real time. I needed 3 more weeks of ordinary mornings and ordinary evenings and Cleo on the end of the bed. I needed time to grieve privately before I had to grieve publicly. The perfect wife behavior wasn't strategy. It was the last thing I could give myself before everything changed. Though I'll admit by the 2nd week, there was something else. Not cruelty, but a bone-deep need for her to feel safe, to be completely certain she was untouchable. Because the only way the ending would carry the full weight of what she'd done was if she believed, right up until the moment I showed her the folder, that she had gotten away with it. I brought her coffee on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, which I'd never done consistently before. I suggested a hike on the 2nd Saturday, a drive up the coast on the 3rd. I remembered to ask after her colleague Patricia, who'd been going through a health scare, the kind of detail I would normally forget to follow up on. I booked a dinner reservation at the restaurant where we'd gotten engaged, a month out, as if I had a future to plan for. She was visibly relieved. The tension I hadn't fully understood she was carrying began to drain from her shoulders. She laughed more easily. She was more affectionate. She stopped taking her phone to the bathroom. Once, lying in bed on a Sunday morning, she said, "I feel like we're good again, like we finally got through something." I looked at the ceiling. "Yeah," I said, "I think we did." There are lines I will carry for a long time. That one is near the top of the list, not because it hurt to hear, but because it confirmed everything. She believed she had survived. She had miscalculated so completely, so fundamentally, that she was lying next to me feeling grateful. Meanwhile, I had been making quiet arrangements. I had moved a portion of our shared savings into a personal account, legally, transparently, in a way Miriam had advised. I had begun separating what was mine from what was ours in the slow, invisible way you can when you know what's coming and the other person doesn't. Not stealing, preparing. I reached out to her parents. I want to be clear. I told them nothing. I simply suggested a dinner, said I had something I wanted to celebrate with the people who mattered most. Her father, Gerald, was delighted. Her mother, Vivienne, said they'd bring dessert. I also called our two closest mutual friends, Marcus and Joe, and extended the same invitation. I framed it around Sarah's recent promotion, which was real and which she was genuinely proud of. Everyone was pleased to come. Everyone thought it was a celebration. For Sarah, it was, right up until it wasn't. I have replayed the moment of that decision many times, whether it was necessary to have them there, whether I was being fair. And I always come back to the same answer. She had spent 7 months building a lie in the presence of everyone who loved us. I wanted the truth to land in the same room. The Saturday arrived overcast and cool. I cooked all afternoon, roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a good bottle of wine I'd been keeping. Sarah dressed carefully. She wore a dark blue dress I'd always loved and small gold earrings, and when she came downstairs, she looked beautiful and happy and proud. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching me plate the food and said, "You didn't have to do all this." "Of course I did," I said. "Tonight matters." She smiled. She believed me entirely. They arrived within 20 minutes of each other. Gerald and Vivienne first, then Marcus and Joe with a bottle of champagne and the easy warmth of people who don't know they're walking into something. We sat down to dinner at 7. The food was good. The conversation was easy, Gerald's retirement project, Joe's new job, a trip Marcus and Joe were planning in the spring. Sarah was sparkling. She told the story of her promotion with the right amount of modesty, and everyone toasted her, and she glowed. She kept glancing at me across the table with an expression I recognized as genuine happiness. I smiled back every time. We were on dessert when I pushed my chair back and said I'd forgotten something in the hallway. No one thought anything of it. I came back with a manila folder and stood at the head of the table for a moment. The room was mid-conversation. Gerald was finishing a sentence. Then I set the folder in front of Sarah, and the room went quiet in the way rooms do when something shifts. Sarah looked at the folder, then at me. "What's this?" she said, still light, still unbothered. "Open it," I said. I will not forget what her face did as she opened that folder. It was like watching a building lose its load-bearing walls, the kind of structural collapse that happens slowly and then all at once. First confusion, then recognition, then something I can only describe as the specific terror of a person who has spent 7 months believing they were invisible, discovering they were never invisible at all. She flipped through the first few pages. The lab report confirming the lipstick wasn't hers. The message screenshots. A hotel receipt from October. A photo. She stopped at the photo. The table was completely silent. Vivienne had gone very still. Gerald looked at the folder and then at me and then at his daughter with an expression I hope I never have to see on a parent's face again. Marcus put down his fork. Joe looked at her hands. "This isn't," Sarah started. "It's not what, Sarah," I said at once quietly. She stopped. "I know what it is," I said. "I've known for 3 weeks, and I've had months of evidence sitting in a folder in my desk drawer that says exactly what it is and exactly how long it has been what it is." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Gerald said her name. That was all. Just her name, in the voice of a father who has understood something he did not want to understand. I reached into my bag and placed the divorce papers on the table beside the folder. I had practiced what I was going to say. I had written it out, revised it, reduced it. What came out in that room was quieter and shorter than anything I had prepared. Sometimes you don't need to make a speech. Sometimes the room already knows. "You didn't just cheat on me," I said. "You decided over and over again, for 7 months, that I wasn't someone you needed to be honest with. You came home from those trips and sat across from me at this table and looked me in the eye and chose the lie. Every single time. So I'm not angry anymore. I'm just finished." I slid the divorce papers toward her. "You can sign those here, or we do this through the courts with everything in that folder on the record. Either way, by Monday I'll have moved out. The house was always going to need to be sold eventually anyway." I paused. And then I said the thing I hadn't written down, the thing that came from somewhere underneath all the planning and the patience and the cold precision of the past 3 weeks. I loved you without reservation. For 11 years, I loved you without a single reservation. That's what makes this so quiet. She was crying by then, not the heaving, dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to perform. Jamie, she said. My name, just my name. I know, I said. I know you're sorry, I know you wish you could take it back, but sorry doesn't put 7 months back together, Sarah. It just doesn't. She signed the papers. She signed them there at the table, with her parents watching and her hands shaking, and the champagne bottle Marcus had brought still sitting on the counter, unopened. I embraced Gerald briefly. I hugged Vivienne, who held on a moment longer than I expected, her hand pressed firmly against my back, as if she was trying to say something she didn't have the words for. I nodded to Marcus and Joe. Then I took the folder and the signed papers and I walked upstairs, and I sat on the edge of the bed where Cleo was sleeping, and I put my hand on her side and felt her breathe. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that too. What I felt in that moment was the specific grief of a woman who just had to end the most important thing in her life, not because she wanted to, but because there was simply nothing left worth keeping. The weeks after were exactly as hard as I expected and nothing like I expected. I found an apartment. I took Cleo. We negotiated the rest through the attorneys, and because the evidence was what it was, the negotiation was brief. Marcus called and came over and said nothing useful, but was simply present, which was exactly right. My sister flew in from Denver and cried more than I did and forced me to eat real food, which I also needed. Danielle disappeared from Sarah's life within 3 weeks. Apparently she had a long-term partner of her own, and when that partner found out, the fallout was immediate and complete. I learned this third hand and filed it under information I had no more emotional energy to spend on. Sarah's parents needed time. Gerald went quiet in the way that men of his generation go quiet when they've witnessed something they don't know how to process. He sent me a card 2 months later, just a few lines, handwritten, saying he was sorry and that he hoped I was okay. I read it 3 times and put it in a drawer. Vivienne called me on a Tuesday evening in early spring, about 2 months after the dinner. I almost didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number at first, and I was in no state for unexpected conversations. But something made me pick up. She spoke carefully, the way people do when they've rehearsed something and are trying not to lose their nerve. She said she was sorry. Not for Sarah, she was very clear about that. She said, I'm calling to say sorry to you for what was done to you in our name at our table over years that you gave honestly. She paused, and then she said, You deserved better, and I want you to know that I know that. I didn't say much. I thanked her. I told her I hoped she was okay. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, not doing anything in particular. That call meant more than she will probably ever know. Not because it changed anything, it didn't, but because sometimes, in the middle of rebuilding your life from the ground up, it matters enormously that one person simply calls to say, I see what happened to you. And it was wrong. Sarah herself called 6 times in the first month. I answered once, near the end of it, and listened while she said the things people say when they've run out of other options. She was not wrong that she was sorry. She was not wrong that she'd lost something irreplaceable, but she was asking me to give her something I had already given up, the willingness to try again with someone who had taught me that I couldn't trust what I was seeing. I wasn't able to give her that. I'm still not. People ask me sometimes what I wish I had done differently, whether I would have confronted her sooner, tried harder, paid more attention months before I found the blouse. And the truth is, I don't think the timing changed anything. She had decided, and no amount of earlier confrontation would have undone a decision that had already been made for 7 months without me. What I've come to understand is this. She did not destroy our marriage because of Danielle. She destroyed it because she believed that I would never look too closely. That my trust was the same thing as blindness. That she could live two lives indefinitely because I was too in love, or too comfortable, or simply too decent to imagine she was capable of it. That assumption that I would never really see her was the most damaging thing she ever did to me. More than the affair, more than the lies, because it meant she had never really seen me either. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a lucky discovery that ended it. It was a cream-colored blouse, imperfectly rinsed, with a smear of the wrong shade of lipstick on the collar, left carelessly at the bottom of a suitcase by a woman who had decided, once too often, that she was untouchable. One careless stain. That's all it took to unravel 7 months of deception. And in a strange, painful, clarifying way, I am grateful for it. Because I would rather know the shape of the truth than live comfortably inside a beautiful lie. Cleo is asleep on the couch in my apartment as I write this. It is a Sunday morning. There is coffee. There is sunlight. There is, for the first time in a very long time, nothing hidden. If this story moved you, please subscribe before you go.